Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a walk through the Frontline for the 13th of December 2022. What's happened overnight? Fairly quiet night, I guess, overall. Let's have a little look to see what has happened in terms of the released figures for Ukraine, as in of the Russians. So they're claiming that 500 liquidated personnel, so that's fairly high. A little bit of a downtick from the day before, but up from what it had been over the previous week. 2 APCs, 2 artillery systems, 7 MLRS. That's interesting. I wonder why there's that uptick in these multiple launch rocket systems. 5 vehicles, fuel tanks, and 1 special equipment. What other news is there? S-300 has struck Kupiansk, just to remind you where Kupiansk is. So that's in our northeastern area of Ukraine. Kupiansk is here. That has been liberated, now controlled by the Ukrainians. That's been hit by an S-300, which, as you all know by now, I imagine that is a surface-to-air missile that can be used in the secondary mode to hit ground targets, but the CEP, the circle error probable, isn't as good hitting ground targets. I don't know if CEP is even relevant for hitting air targets. The building on the territory of Zerka machine building plant at St. Petersburg is on fire, so more Russia on fire incident, 200 square meters. Yet another, well, I mean, it could be sabotage, could be complete accident, could be an insurance job. I imagine there's going to be an awful lot of insurance jobs going on in Russia at the moment as the economy takes a serious downturn. The ISW has reported that Russian forces appear to lack sufficient infrastructure to support their troops in Crimea. Now, I often talk about logistical support and talk about railway networks, road networks, getting in, food and equipment, supplies, ammunition, everything to troops on the front line, to troops everywhere. But this is a slightly different approach to logistics here. So Russian and force supplies. Russian military bloggers claim that the 1472nd Naval Hospital in Sevastopol is facing blood donor supply shortages for wounded Russian personnel. And just to remind you, I reported that this is the case back here as well, that actually Luhansk and Donetsk, they're really suffering with supply of blood issues. The bloggers claim that hospital staff notified the Russian military command of lacking commercially provided supplies for blood collection, but had not received any support in rectifying the problem. The shortage is reportedly caused by lack of budgetary provisions for blood transfusion-related materials in 2022. The military bloggers implied that corruption is at play. Well, it could be corruption. It could also be that, do you know what, you're at war. And if you talk about Crimea, Kerch Bridge is gone, or mainly gone, and the other supplies are difficult. And so, you're in the middle of war, everything's going to be difficult, plus corruption probably. The Ukrainian partisans have hit a bridge in Melitopol, which is, so just show you exactly where it is. So it's coming in here. It's on the M14 sort of highway. It's an important bridge, and it has been hit. The pillars have been taken out. That was its repair job in 2020. This is what it looks like now, that complete dip. I presume it means it can't be used. There's no traffic on it there, as you can see. And this is what it looks like the morning after. There's no traffic driving on it. It looks like, yeah, bit of a dip. As you can see just over there. So that is the sort of thing that causes a right headache for the Russians, because suddenly they can't use that road and they have to use another road, and that affects obviously logistics and supplies. Now this is an interesting one for me. So it seems that a Tochka U Orgrom OTRK missile has hit a Russian army base in Klinsky in Bryansk region in Russia. So Klinsky is here, so just show you where Bryansk is. This is the town of Klinsky, but this is the region. So you're talking about Ukraine here, Chernihiv, Kiev, so right over towards Belarus. You've got Russian, you've got the Kursk region, you've got the Belgorod region, Kursk region or Oblast, and then you've got the Bryansk one here, and it's just over towards the left of that. Kharkiv is there. Anyway, there's a base that has been hit, and man, so this is interesting because it looks like it's a repair base for Russian vehicles that have been sort of, damaged or in need of maintenance. It's a big old crater that, and it's taken out a couple of whatever vehicles that are probably not even fully working order. And I thought the Ukrainians had run out of these and they'd used all of their Tochkas up, and they'd use them all up when they knew they were getting in HIMARS. Now, these are ballistic missiles. Ballistic means they're not cruise missiles. You fire them up and they come down. They don't cruise, and you can't sort of change their trajectory as far as I understand it. So these ballistic missiles you can put nuclear warheads on them, biological warheads, but they have quite a big warhead. Otherwise almost 500 kilograms. The Tochka U, and these are from the late 80s, has a 120-kilometer range with a CEP, circle error probable, of 95 meters. So, if it goes anywhere within 95 meters of the intended target, that's accurate. But of course, that's only 50% of the time. Other 50% of the time, it could go anywhere. So the question is, why are they using quite a significant warhead against a kind of repair base? I don't know. I don't know whether that's the wisest use of a Tochka U, but who knows? I'm sure we'll find out more about that. Anyway, let's get to Frontlines. Oh, actually, before I say that, there have been a couple of hits over the recent couple of days. Now, I reported one in Avdivka, which caused quite a few deaths, apparently. But there was one in Svatove as well, on a hostel there. Now, the report was there was a huge number of deaths. Actually, I don't think it was. ISW is saying now that a lot of damage to the building, some deaths. I've seen some video footage of it. A few, there were a few deaths, but I don't know that it's as big a hit as people were thinking. But anyway, hit to a hostel full of with troops in. Some claiming it's a Wagner accumulation of troops, which would be interesting given that Svatove and Wagner are generally operational down here. I don't know whether that's confusing the Avdivka attack with a Svatove attack, as the Avdivka would have much more likely been Wagner than Svatove. But anyway, sorry, I missed out on that one yesterday, so that was from not last night, but the night before. Anyway, let's go to our front lines, and effectively, again, rather similar to yesterday, not an awful lot of change, certainly up in the Kupiansk down to Svatove to Kreminna front line. So this is this top bit here we're going to look at. And there is, stop pressing that. Come on, Pierce, sort it out. So apparently there's definitely geolocated footage now of Kizlivska and Kotylyarivka here, definitely under Ukrainian control. I've had that under Ukrainian control for a week or so. So or possibly even longer. So nothing unusual there. But that's about the most information that's coming out around here. Still not a lot on this sort of Tavozhanka area, Liman Pershi, but we shall see. It's always interesting to look at the shelling. DefMon produces a map every day, shelling along the northern border with Russia, but quite a lot of hotspot along the sort of Kupiansk to Svatove area. So lots of shelling there, and then down further towards Kreminna, around just along the P66 highway. So major shelling around there. In fact, it appears that the Ukrainians apparently have fire control over large amounts of this highway coming down here, even though they're slightly further away. Arguably around here, apparently there's lots of fire control of the highway. Chervona-Popivka fighting around Ploshchanka, which is here. Once it renders, Ploshchanka's there. Ukrainians have repelled Russian attacks around Chervono-Pavlivka. Russia is claiming that they are doing sort of successful counterattacks around here to regain lost ground. Ukrainians saying they're repelling those counterattacks, but it's not so much. It appears clear that Ukraine aren't necessarily on the attack in the way they were initially to regain this territory. That Russia are pushing back in this area. So we have, this is according to No Report, says the further down south from there, around Kreminna itself, the Ukrainians are gradually closing in. And he says only the Russians can escape from the east, fighting around Ploshchanka, repelled attacks around Chervono-Pavlivka, and Russia counterattacked at the Serebryansky forest but retreated. Okay, let's make a little bit of sense of that, and actually we can have a look at what Defmon says, because he's got some stuff on that. So this is, well, actually, let's look at Kreminna first. So the idea is that the Ukrainians are encroaching further and further. I mean, there's no point in me moving my maps because who knows exactly where they are. But you've got this forest area to the south of Kreminna. You've got a sort of forested area just to the northwest. And it appears that the Ukrainians are encroaching. Zhitlivka, there's sort of fighting around there. No report saying the only really way out of Kreminna is to the east, because, you know, there might be fire control over these sort of roads to some extent. So sort of getting back out to the east. But anyway, that the Russians attacked towards here and were repelled. So I talked to you before about how the Russians have done attacks towards Serebryanka, the town, as opposed to the forest. But there have been some sort of clandestine attacks up here. No real detail on this, but this is what Defmon says. So the Ukrainians repulsed attacks around Serebryansk forestry. This is north of the Severodonetsk River by Serebryanka. So where I was talking about just there. So we have, let's have a little look. So we have Belyka here. And I was talking about how there were these attacks a week or so ago, apparently up here, but they were sort of quite secretive attacks. Well, actually, Defmon is now saying the attacks are coming from the Russians towards the north and down through the forest here. So we were talking about how Pavlivka was being pressured with an attack north by the Ukrainians from Pavlivka a few days back. Well, again here we have Russians counter-attacking. So on one day it seems that Ukrainians are attacking somewhere, and then the next day the Russians are attacking right back. Now this is slightly contradictory to the idea that No Report says that AFU is gradually closing the Kreminna front from closing in on Kreminna from most sides, and Russia can only escape east. And then at the same time, Defmon says that Russia are doing counterattacks through the forest south of Kreminna, almost from the Pavlivka direction. So, you know, make of that what you will. A bit of confusion there. Suffice to say that there's a lot of fighting going on around Kreminna and south in the forested area. Just here, just north of Belyka. So Pavlivka, Kreminna, Belyka, Serebryanka, Dubrova. This kind of area is seeing a lot of activity. And then really we come down south to Vuhledar and Bakhmut, where you can imagine there's a lot of news as per normal. Okay, the first thing to say is there are repelled attacks all the way up near Marinka or Mayansky skirt, just here. Repelled attacks, repelled attacks, repelled attacks, repelled attacks, repelled attacks. Lots of fighting going on. Vuhledar, there's fierce fighting. In fact, here's an idea. I mean, it looks like Aleppo to me in Syria. Here's fighting in Vuhledar.
Выбило их оттуда, блядь. Як меньше, блядь, дохуя их там было. Побывало к ебаной матери, нахуй. Горели, бежала, блядь. Все, сука. Пидоросня ебаная. Добегалась, нахуй.
Just gives you a kind of an idea of the sort of stuff that's going on there. Robar says in the Bakhmut sector, armed clashes continue. Wagner assault units took over 2 enemy outposts in the Bakhmut-Soledar line. Russian units supported by artillery are attacking east of Toretsk. I'm going to get onto that. That's pretty important. And Ukrainian command are preparing to assault Russian positions near Pavlivka. So let's have a look. So basically, Soledar, lots of fighting going on in Soledar, but there's fighting in Pidhorodne. Here, there could be street fighting going on there. This is where there are claims that the Ukrainians destroyed a bridge. I think it's here, a railway bridge that they've blown up in order to provide barricade, I think. But there are reports that the Russians, I mean, I put a couple of spikes here to show that there's possibly street fighting now to the west of the gas station that I showed you or talked about there being thermal imaging footage of that being blown up and Russian troops getting destroyed there over a number of evenings. Well, it looks like the Russians are now advanced past there. Also down Lumumbi Street, there's advancing fighting going down there. I'm not quite sure exactly how far. And then over around the garbage dump here and around that area of Bakhmut. And then we come down to Opitny, where the Ukrainians still sort of, I think, hold most of Opitny here, but the Russians are fighting around there. And as we come down, the usual things around Klishchivka, and then we have this pushed and fighting between Kupiansk and Bilohora. Exactly where I'm not sure. There are, I think, there are trench lines around here. So if you look at that, this is obviously quite old maps from Google Earth from 2019, I think. So you can see trench lines around there. Whether these would have already been lost to the Russians is unknown, but certainly there's a lot of fighting going on. The ISW has a lot to say without saying too much. It's all kind of like repelled attacks kind of thing. Intense battles for Bakhmut and committing. So the Wagner. An unnamed US military official stated that Wagner Group and Russian forces are engaging in intense battles for Bakhmut and committing significant resources to maintain the pace, but noted that Ukrainian forces continue to hold the line. Yeah, but I think there are marginal gains really for the Russians at the moment on a sort of daily basis. Repelled assaults in all of those places. So here's the bridge. Geolocated footage shows a destroyed railway bridge over the E40 MO3 highway northwest of Pidhorodne, which Russian sources claim to be one of 2 remaining ground lines of communications into Bakhmut. Russian sources claim the Ukrainian forces blew up a bridge to create an artificial barricade on the E40 towards Sloviansk. A Russian source also claimed that Wagner assault detachment established control over 2 former Ukrainian platoon positions on the Bakhmut-Soledar line approaching the highway connecting the settlements. So it is difficult around there. Attacks coming out the Avdivka area, so that's just north of here, Zenopilia here, Avdivka. So essentially, I mean, really, what you've got now is attacks everywhere. I mean, the Russians are putting effort on Bakhmut from every single front. So Kupiansk here, Klishchivka, so they're pushing towards Bilohora, they're pushing towards Klishchivka, they're pushing out of Avdivka, they're pushing into Opitny and at times trying to flank round Opitny. They're pushing here, Pidhorodne, and Soledar. It is just a huge amount of pressure around Bakhmut, and obviously it's going to be some, like I keep saying, some kind of attempt to do this or this or both, whilst also fixing. So fighting around here fixes the Ukrainian troops in, while they also sort of try and overwhelm the defences and encircling at the same time. It is difficult there. And what's also interesting is that there are pushes towards Druzhba from Mayorsk here. So you get this attempt here. Now this is Toretsk. Toretsk is quite an important, well-defended city. However, we're now understanding that there are, I think, attacks coming further down south, sort of up into New York again, and it looks like Toretsk could be under some pressure. There's been fighting towards Toretsk. Now, just to zoom out a little bit, you've got some important sort of settlements around here, and if the Russians can, you know, surround these towns, these cities, if you like, then this creates quite a mayhem for getting fire control over really important ground lines of communication, these roads, and the Russians appear to be actually launching what is an offensive, and that appears to be the case with Toretsk. So I wonder whether they're going to be launching a similar kind of encirclement offensive involving Toretsk that they are doing in Bakhmut. And that means that there's going to be just equal sort of bloodbaths and meat grinder action going on down here. Not an awful lot is said in the ISW about Toretsk, but quite a few other sources are saying Toretsk is looking like, and New York as well, looking like they could be under increasing pressure. Now, as we come further down south towards Avdivka, we see that the Russians are putting further attack, sort of continuing the vein from up north here. They are continuing to attack in all sorts of places, and there are now attacks. Let's go to Defmon, who shows that Yuriivka is being attacked. So let's just give a slightly larger here. Sorry, Yuriivka's. Actually, where is Yuriivka? Oh, yes, sorry, that's the one near New York. It's Krasnohorivka, which is interesting because Krasnohorivka is again a pretty sizable settlement, which will be fairly difficult for the Russians to take, but they seem to be going for a lot of places at the moment. So Krasnohorivka would indicate a larger attempt at a larger encirclement, but that's possibly a tough nut to crack. But the Russians are going for it. They're attacking towards Krasnohorivka. Now, about the only kind of success that the Ukrainians are having in a meaningful way around here is possibly around Pervomaisky, Pisky, and Vodyanye. So the Russians are claiming they are repelling attacks. Apparently, they're repelling attacks into Pisky, but some Russian mill bloggers are claiming that actually Russians have made progress into Pervomaisky. So again, confusing. It might be that the Ukrainians have breached this ring road here, so they're pushing towards Pisky from the north as well. And that's interesting development. So that's a sign of successful or partially successful Ukrainian counterattacks around there. But other than that, things are difficult. We've got another Krasnohorivka down here. Krasnohorivka. It's Ukraine after all. Attacks around there as well, and Marinka. We're hearing that, or Russians are claiming that they now. It was 50-50 in Marinka. Some of the Russians, the LNR, are claiming that they have 70% of Marinka, but they're still fighting in the center as well. So quite what that means and how that means that the map is set up is difficult to understand. They are failing to get past Druzhba Street, which is. Let's have a little look. Yeah, so I think that could be. I don't know. It's difficult when you've got Russian and Ukrainian and English. But the claims of Druzhba Street is much more likely to be Druzhby Avenue here, which is this main avenue up right across the center of Marinka. Now, if the Russians are claiming themselves they're struggling to get past Druzhby Avenue, then it's difficult to see how they have 70% of Marinka, but they might. Who knows? It's just really tough fighting around there. And then we come further down south towards Novomykhailivka, Vuhledar, and Pavlivka, and we'll see what's been going on there. Now, some claims that the Ukrainians have been on the offensive a little bit near Pavlivka, perhaps taking back some territory around here, but the Russians have been on a defensive around here. But really, rather than there being a lot of activity around this area, it seems to be all about Velyka and Novosilka. And elsewhere around here. Now there are some mapping suggests, so Andrew Perpetua suggests that actually, if you look at, let's try and get the map moved. If you look at the Russians, actually, he has the map looking like this in the area, so just above Rivnopol, and then this kind of little salient there, something more like that. But others actually have it slightly differently, and it's interesting that there are claims, and again these seem like quite confusing claims. So there was the attack that was repelled yesterday towards Velyka Novosilka that I talked about, where there was a whole load of armaments that was taken. But the Russians are still claiming they took some a land in that. Now, whether that's towards here, there's some claims that they actually crossed the highway here. There's some claims that actually Russians control my lines that I've got there are incorrect, and actually they control something like that. And it goes off down like that as it was before. And in fact, they've taken a bunch more of that area of that road there. But it's just really difficult. Lots of competing claims. And here's an example. Russian sources, this is from the ISW, claimed that Russian forces made marginal advances towards Velyka Novosilka, which is the same place that the Ukrainians claim that they boasted a real kind of like defeat of the Russian forces there. And Russian sources themselves boasted about a Ukrainian retreat in this area, while a Ukrainian source stated that the Ukrainian defences halted a Russian advance. Who knows what's going on? A Russian military blogger claimed on December the 11th, and this is interesting, that Russian forces massed as if preparing for a full ground attack, but only conducted reconnaissance in force near Velyka Novosilka, and claimed such an act indicates poor readiness. So there you go. And that, but at the same time, the Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces repelled a Ukrainian attempt to advance towards Neshkuchna. Okay, the problem is Neshkuchna is next to Velyka Novosilka. So they're at the one time claiming we're making advances towards Velyka Novosilka, and at the same time we're repelling Ukrainian attacks towards Neshkuchna. So who knows? I mean, I've moved my lines there in line with Andrew Perpetua, who's done a bunch of sort of mapping and updated his maps around there, and I've gone in line with him. I trust him quite a bit, but it is with a little bit of caution that this is probably largely a grey zone at the moment, and who knows exactly what's happening there. So that's that particular area. What does No Reports have to say? Russia took a beating in Velyka Novosilka. Russian sources confirmed they retreated. General staff reported a lot of destroyed equipment. The Ukrainian pushed Russia back a bit near Vodyane. I told you that. Fighting continues in Marinka. Both hold 50% of the town, although Russians claim they hold 70%. So there you go. Who knows? And then we get on to Kherson, so no map changes. Russia shelled Kherson city. At least 3 people died and 10 got wounded when a postal office was attacked. The area around the Kimburn Spit remains unknown. For now, we can say AFU definitely does not actively work there. So that's interesting. So that is a claim from No Reports that the Ukrainians are not in Kimburn Spit. And I was saying they almost certainly are, or they almost certainly have been. But whether they've just fully retreated from there, it's not that useful. They can't get through the peninsula to the main headland. I don't know. Who knows? It's just a lot of operational security around there. Anyway, that brings me to the end of the full Frontline report. Just not a lot happening down in the Kherson area. Hopefully that was useful. Please like, subscribe, and share. This is going out on my ATP Geo sub channel today. First time that a Frontline update's gone up on here, so hopefully it will all be moved by the end of the month to this new home. Please like, subscribe, share. Check out all the ways you can help the channel down in the description below. Books and coffee and all that kind of stuff. Really appreciate that. It allows me to do what I do, honestly, completely. So thanks. Take care.